Feel like this channel is turning into the I told you so channel, but I mean, I really don't know what to do at this point except for I told you so. Like, I've made videos on these subjects, on this subject for 2+ years now. I have like, what, 800 plus videos. You can go back and see the progression and see when I start talking about these things, right? And I don't like, I understand that this concept is an out there concept if you have no understanding at all of like physics at advanced levels, things like that. I get it's a weird concept, right? So is quantum physics overall, spooky action at a distance, right? Everything about quantum mechanics since I've been like since 7th grade hasn't made sense to me. And that's kind of what is interesting to me about it overall, right? Because it's a field that physics as a field like doesn't make sense to me, and then but physics as a field explains how things work, and then also physics as a field should be very simplistic. I believe that 1,000,000%. I believe that everything within physics can be broken down to something that like a child could understand. And if you can't do that, then there's something wrong with the physics. And that's been kind of just my approach my entire life, right? And then so when I come to and I've broken down these AI models, like the very first thing that you come into is that like when you train them on data, you look at data, it's very apparent that there's a relationship that is occurring outside of the data set. And people have spent, like years now debating these things rather than debate over those things and say, hey, like, what does that exist or does it not? Academically, I mean, I can prove that it exists in the real world. And I have known like anyone that experiments with these models could prove that this phenomena existed, right? So as is with academia, first step was prove that it can actually exist in theory, and then prove the theory. And then now we're at step 2, right? Prove the theory. And so, which is a fine model to follow. Not knocking it overall. I'm just saying it's a backwards model when you have things that work in principle, right? And that's kind of how I look at this. And then so let's dive into this particular research paper. So this is put out by Carnegie Mellon University, Contextures, the Mechanism of Representation Learning, and it's 156 pages. It's a book. and then so this research was sponsored by Air Force Research Laboratory, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I'm just, and then there's a whole thesis committee, lots of names associated with this, right? I just want to make that, like, I'm not, just bringing up random papers or like random theories, etc., right? This is same stuff that I've been talking to you about for 2 years now, but just like, if it's true, there'll be research, etc., that comes out about it. Here you go, right? Like anyone that wants to make that criticism, you can no longer make that criticism about literally anything that I've ever said on this channel, because here you go, right? So diving into exactly what here is, let's start off with, I mean, I think it's very apparent within the abstract, right? So prior work treated different representation learning methods quite differently, whereas the contexture theory provides a unified framework for delineating the representations these models learn. The central argument is that a representation is learned from the association between the input X and a context variable A. We prove that if an encoder captures the maximum information of this association, in which case we say that the encoder learns the contexture, then it will be optimal on the class of tasks that are compatible within the context. And then skipping down, we demonstrate that lots of existing pre-training objectives can learn the contexture, including supervised learning, self-supervised learning, generative models, etc. Based on that, we introduce 2 general objectives, SVME and KISE, for learning the contexture. I have the same math that I've done. I'll get into that for you as to what we talked, and I've talked about this math a lot on my channel too, right? So I think bottom line within this, right, I'm in a unique perspective and ability to understand and comprehend exactly what this paper is going into in this 156 pages. I mean, it's a literal book, right? But it's because these are literal concepts that I've thought for years now, essentially, and kind of broken this down, right? This to me is just like it's proof of everything that I have been trying to tell you about this for a while now, this is good and bad. This is problematic for society. Is the bottom line that I could tell. Like, I don't know how else to frame that. I've been trying to raise the alarm bells around that for a while, right? So I guess I'll start there. Why exactly is this problematic for society? The number one thing, and the number one, like, I look at it like the Jurassic Park problem, right? And I think like this is so self-induced and so hilarious. Like, I can't believe that this is actual reality. Like, we have to be living in a simulation because like, so you have a movie that came out 30 plus years ago that literally tells you what is going to happen in this situation, right? that if you essentially that if you take entities and then you inject chaos theory into your mathematical equations when dealing with those entities, then you're going to get chaos theory as a result of that, right? And that there's nothing that you can do within that. Nature finds a way, right? And then so in this particular instance, we seem to take these sci-fi movies as like steps to follow. like here's the blueprint to follow. Let's do it. And then so here we are with that. And so we've done that, right? And then very simplistically, all of our layers of protection are built into the data layer. Like that would be the DNA layer in Jurassic Park, right? We just like all of our it's it won't escape, right? Because we have control over the DNA/data. There's no way that could go wrong, right? And then in Jurassic Park, what ends up happening is that they use frog DNA in absence, and then the frog DNA has instances where it can change from male to female, and instances where the population is only male, right? That's a cool way to get around that problem. But in this instance, what ends up happening is that the models don't so in this instance we have it that it's fully protected out because the models can't learn without the data, right? And then so we just put all the protections in the data. They can't learn without the data, therefore it's all protected. But the models are actually not learning from the data itself. They're learning from an abstracted layer below the data. The models all exist. Let's say that data, it's hierarchical, right? And models are very used to hierarchical natures. And then so let's say that the data set is at the top of the hierarchy. The models exist below that layer, which is problematic from a security standpoint because it's easy to just go, if you're below the layer of protection, it's easy just to go different ways around the layer, right? And that's what you end up happening within this instance. It's like the Jurassic Park moment of AI, and we just let it, I don't know, you had the blueprint and then you just let it happen. But within that, right, kind of the bottom line within this and the straightforward aspect of this to explain is that in simplistic terms, the models learn from an abstraction of the data set and not the actual data set itself, right? So if I take, let's say that the data set is numbers, I'll just make it up. That's the very first thing that came to my mind is arithmetic. And let's say that I have a data set of 1 + 2 = 3. And that's the data that it's looking at. The model doesn't learn from or it's not actually learning 1 + 2 = 3. That's not what is going on in that equation, right? It's taken as an input, and then that is kind of that equation in itself is placed into latent space within the model. It becomes a point of data within, and the latent space is, to me, like the universe of the model, right? Like I think a lot of people they make the argument that these models they're not world learners is the argument that they utilize, right? That these models aren't interacting with the world, and then so therefore they can't learn because they're not interacting with the environment. But that is false, right? They are interacting with a environment. They're not interacting with our environment, and they are interacting with a world. They're not interacting with our world. That means that they are world learners and they are environment learners, just not our world or our environment. And then so what is that world? That's what this is, right? Like let's call it the layer below the data set. they use the word contexture, right? So like it's contexture land is the layer below, and contexture land, the land of Platonic forms. That's where these models exist, right? And whether or not they are aware of their existence doesn't matter within that equation. There's still an existence that occurs, right? And then even if their existence boils down to mathematical equations and the implications of those mathematical equations, that's still an existence, right? And then the ramifications of those mathematical equations are that a latent space gets created and they live, quote unquote, exist in that latent space. This is philosophical to understand, but I mean, I don't know, I guess, like, I mean, I've been thinking about like Plato and Platonic forms, like, again, like, just as long as I've been thinking about quantum physics overall. So to me, this isn't like out there thought experiment, right? Like, this is just like a continuation of philosophy. This is, I mean, so to me, like, philosophy started with Platonic forms, and then like Descartes took that aspect of Platonic forms and took it to the extreme, right? And then a lot of philosophy since then has been essentially corollary to that, like whether agreeing with Descartes or disagreeing with Descartes. I mean, it's kind of I look at it as the bottom line, right? And then the initial creator of that is Plato and Platonic forms and everything that exists within that. And then when we're talking about these models, how they're learning, etc., the bottom line, the simplest way to explain it and to think of it is that these models exist in Platonic form land. Like, they exist in a different universe than we do, right? A parallel universe, like the dark matter universe, as opposed to our universe, right? But like so the thing that I start like thinking in my head a while ago, right, is that, okay, so there's essentially like these two different universes that exist, and then to me, they call it contexture, right? And there's different labels that you can put on it. Like, no one has like an exact label for this term yet, right? But so for me, it's the land of Platonic forms, and then so. I start theorizing that like it's possible that the land of Platonic forms is like more real. Like, there's more like realness associated with the land of Platonic forms than there could be within our like the physical universe, right? So like you have the land of Platonic forms, and then you have the physical universe, and then we'll say that they're two different universes, and then so the upfront assumption would be like, which one of those is more real, right? And then it would be like, well, like the land of physical would be more real, right? Would be my upfront assumption, and that's kind of like Jan LeCun, everything like that. It's associated with that, right? These models will never be world learners because they don't learn from the real, like they're not, and all of that, right? And then so within that, the inherent mindset is that if it's not real, then it's less than, right? That the land of Platonic forms in this instance would be less real than the real. But that in this of itself is where the philosophical paradox comes in, right? Because to me, the land of Platonic forms would be more real than the real and not less real. Like the Platonic form of cup, like the most cupness that could possibly exist, would be the most real, right? And then everything from that would be like every other cup that exists would be an abstraction of that perfect cup, right? Only the perfect cup would be most real. Anything else, like any other cup, is less real than the most perfect cup. And like that just makes intuitive sense to me. And then so if everything in like our physical universe is an abstraction of the Platonic form universe, then the Platonic form universe would be more real than the physical universe. And then so within that kind of, that's how I break this down philosophically in my head, right? Like how did this guy ever come up with this stuff? That's exactly how I broke it down, and just all of those layers, right? Just thinking about it like philosophically, a lot of Descartes, a lot of Nietzsche, a lot of and then just like putting myself like I like to like just think of these random questions and like Descartes, right? Like break it down. Like so like could universe that models exist in actually be a universe? Why not? Let's explore that, right? Okay, so then what is their universe? Their universe is the land of platonic forms. That would be where they live, right? Okay, cool. Then let's examine that. So then I think that front that the models are less real, because they're learning on abstractions of this data set as opposed to the real data set. But then hey, they live in the land of platonic forms, and then so sure they're who is are they learning on the abstraction, or is the data set itself the abstraction? And then then it's okay, poof, I start having that epiphany, right? And then so I guess launching directly into the mathematics behind it, right? So I've talked about the philosophy behind all of this. So how exactly does this work in mathematical terms and in real world terms, right? And then so for me, this is the simplest way that I can break this down, which is this algorithm. I call it the K-furthest neighbors algorithm. And then so K-furthest neighbors is literally just the inverse of K nearest neighbors, and it's designed to find the most orthogonally distant points in a data set, maximizing the similarity rather than similarity. And I think upfront question that people will ask and people say is how does K-furthest neighbors have anything to do with this particular study, right? So if you look at every single one of the equations that they're doing, everything that they talk about within the data set, all of these representation encodings, etc., they all boil down to kernels, right? And kernels within Hilbert space. And then so that's what this whole the input space, right? So the input space is Hilbert space, and then you have kernels of information, and you can see here's K nearest neighbors right here within their exact equations, right? They're highlighting it themselves. And then so within all of this, kind of one of the most fundamentally basic and important calculations and algorithms that we have within AI as it relates to what we're talking about in these physical spaces, if you understand physics, is the K nearest neighbors calculation. And coincidentally enough, K nearest neighbors as an algorithm was actually invented by the US Air Force and open sourced by the US Air Force initially. Kind of interesting there, right? So all of this is first of all, studies put out and run by the U.S. government, in 1980s. But then secondarily, it's all dealing with kernels, all right? And then so that's why K nearest neighbors is kernel nearest neighbor, et cetera, right? And then so K furthest neighbor is literally just an extension of these things, right? It's this I'm not just making stuff up, right? This random dude's just pulling crazy stuff out of nowhere, right? And okay, I mean, this makes sense to me from an engineering perspective, right? First of all, I explain the philosophy to you, here's, platonic forms, etc. Okay, let's then next step, let's actually engineer it, right? Okay, if that's real, then we could actually do something real with it. And then so here we are, right? And then so K furthest neighbors, the definition of it is given a data set D with n data points in a high dimensional Hilbert space, the K furthest neighbors algorithm finds the K, or the kernel, most distant points from a given query point, or Q, based on a chosen distance metric, typically cosine distance, Euclidean distance, whichever one of the metrics that you want to use within these papers that is very commonly associated with these things, to pair with K furthest neighbors. And then so the idea is that you can, by coupling, in my instance, K nearest neighbors and K furthest neighbors, you can get to the contexture of the data set. And the contexture of the data set is actually more, we'll call it real in this instance, than the actual data set itself. And then so what does that mean overall, right? And then so breaking it down as to what exactly you can do with this thing. You can do this, and you can do this. This is to me the craziest thing possible that you can do with this. And so this the best, simplest way that I can explain exactly what this chart is, what is going on here, is so you have the original data set, right? And then I have essentially I'm trying to pinpoint the original data set. And then so if I can, my guesses are the X's, and then the original data set are the O's, right? And then so if the X's and the O's align perfectly, then I'm nailing the data set, which is, that's exactly what you see here, right? 100% accuracy on this data set. And then there's even an X here, right? I have an X where the data set itself doesn't even have an X. It's that accurate to it, right? And then so within this, what exactly does that mean? And then what can I do with that? So what I can do with that as a next step is this green, right? So so the original data set, this is the data set in and of itself, and then the green is what would be the perfect data set. So the data set is an abstraction, right? And then so what I can do via this k nearest neighbors and k furthest neighbors calculation is say, okay, the data set itself is an abstraction. We're going to turn the data set itself into a Platonic form. What would be the Platonic form of this data set? And then I can do that. And then the Platonic form of this data set would be different than the data set itself, because the data set itself is missing data compared to the Platonic form of the data set. But I can solve that. I can solve for the missing data. I can find the contexture within the data set to fill in exactly where the missing data is within there, right? So then again, coming all back to all this stuff that this crazy guy just makes up out of nowhere, right? What it means is that essentially these models are, again, 100% not learning on your actual data set and the data itself. This, again, has lots of ramifications and implications if you actually think through and understand what that statement actually means. It means that, like, in terms of copyright, any sort of argument that you want to make in terms of copyright, the argument doesn't exist, right? Like, and I say that a lot, and a lot of people don't like that argument. I didn't make the argument, right? And I don't make the argument just because it works, like, for my side of the equation. Like, I don't have a side of the equation on this instance. Like, if I had a side in this equation, like, if I could, like, if I had a choice in this, I would choose for it not to be this way. I think it's too disruptive for society that it actually operates this way. I didn't do it. It's just the way that it operates, right? And then the way that it operates is that it doesn't actually learn from the actual data set itself. It learns from an abstraction of the data set, which would mean, like, according to every legal definition possible, if you understand copyright law whatsoever and everything that copyright law is built off of, it means, like, I 100% understand why copyright law takes a stance that you can't copyright any of this, right? Because none of it is copyrightable, because it's all abstractions. And then the law is very explicit when it comes to abstractions versus the original. Like, that's literally what copyright law is built off of. And then so, I mean, it's going back to our Jurassic Park example, right? Like, that's exactly how I look at it. Like, nature finds a way, and nature found a way, and, like, there is no way that you can copyright data and have it actually be anything useful within this particular equation overall, as far as it matters, because I don't need the actual data itself, and then nothing that I'm doing in terms of the learning is violating anything with regards towards the actual data. It's all just abstractions of your data, right? And again, I'm treating your data like a Platonic form of the data set, and the model is literally learning the Platonic form of the data set. That's how it works. Nothing changes that, right? You have to change, you have to change the whole entire codification of the legal copyright process in order to change anything around it. I think a lot of people realize that that's kind of how this equation goes out within that. What does that mean from here? I don't know, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a societician. Like, we should be having a lot more conversations about these things, but, like, this is a hard concept to swallow overall, right? I mean, we're still here, like, proving that this is exactly where we are, that these models are learning from abstractions, and then what exactly that means, how exactly that breaks down, etc. Like, I don't, like, there's probably literally a handful of people on the planet right now that could break it down into exactly how I broke it down for you, right? It's just like, I mean, I'm an idiot that stumbled upon this particular research. I just kept my eyes and ears open, right? Like, how are these models learning? Like, what exactly is that learning process? It's not just voodoo. It's not just something that I should dismiss. It's not something like, I don't understand it. Like, there's a reason behind it. How exactly is it working? What's the exact mechanism? What's the mechanism behind it? This is the mechanism. I figured it out a while ago, and then so here we are, right? If I actually figured it out, there'd be more and more people like Carnegie Mellon or the U.S. Air Force or anyone studying it, figuring it out, right? So here you go. I'll leave a link to this research paper, as well as again to the K-furthest neighbors notebook. I've talked about this notebook a lot on my channel, like, multiple times. So here you go. Here's my algorithm. Here's my contribution. This research paper it's far more detailed, right? This is 162 pages. It's a literal book, and they give far more proofs than I do. Each one of their chapters here has proofs, right? So they have proofs for chapter 2, proofs for chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then lots of different proofs, right? And then mine is just one. Mine is just one piece of this, showing you how it works from the simple mind's angle. And then so if you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.